Hey everyone, this is Mike. So today, it's been a while, so welcome back to you and me. So I wanted to talk a little bit about today, about what is essentially the kind of unified field theory from Einstein to personal growth, enhancement, mental health. And basically, this was discovered by an NLP and hypnotherapy practitioner by the name of John Overdurf. There's some videos on him if you want to look up. It's called, in NLP, it's called the meta pattern. And if you actually deconstruct a lot of theories, counseling theories, even like EMDR, hypnotherapy, CBT, there's basically a handful of elements that seem to be present more or less in every theory of change, and this goes to the brain knowledge of how neurons connect. There's a theory called when neurons fire together, they wire together. And an example of that would be if you ever gave a presentation in school, and maybe you made a mistake and you were laughed at, you would now pair being laughed at with giving a presentation, and if it was strong enough, to this day, you might get nervous giving a presentation. More often, unless it's really traumatic and it can happen one time, it usually is over several times that we make these associations. So basically, you're connecting two things in the brain, and the synapses, connect, and then so the two things get connected together. This goes back to behavioral stuff. Pavlov, even in the 30s, where they had this experiment where they had a white rabbit with a child, and the little child was excited about the rabbit, little, furry, hairy white rabbit, and so soft, and then they would make banging noises like the pots and pans and banged together behind the kids, and the kid jumped out of his skin. And of course, you can imagine the next time he saw a white rabbit, he cried. Right, so originally he was happy. He was, oh, look at this, nice animal, a soft animal, and of course that then transferred to anything white and fluffy and soft. He now cried. So they made that connection. Now, of course, we do the same thing, right? We can make both positive and negative connections. If you associate home-baked foods with grandma, then whenever you smell baked goods, it may remind you of grandma, even if grandma's passed away. And you'll either have a positive association, or if you're connecting with grandma and she passed away, maybe you feel like depressed all of a sudden. And you won't even realize why. You could be walking down the street and past a bakery, and then everything's going great, and all of a sudden you start feeling sad and depressed. Like, what was that about? And it's because you made an association with baking, grandma, and the connection of missing grandma, and so you might feel bad. So this NLP practitioner, John Overdurf, discovered that and this was primarily with CBT, but I think the applications across the board, is there's a few stages that growth and change occur. The first is that you associate into a negative state. So, for example, if you're feeling depressed or anxious, you think about a specific time when that occurred. Because the brain kind of, records things in these little nodules, right? And so, instead of kind of this grand, I'm depressed or I'm anxious in general, you look for a specific moment in time. So let's say, for example, you had a breakup, or you got a bad quarterly review at work. You specifically focus in on that event. And very often you can even close your eyes and say, yeah, remember, it was last Tuesday, or last week, or last year. And you really kind of tap in and almost channel that experience. And the goal of which is to light up that part of the brain that is causing distress, that is the uncomfortable, anxious, depressed, angry, guilty, right? So when we bring in the resourceful state, it knows where to go, right? Because we have all these memories. So you kind of light it up. And you don't need to spend a lot of time there. But you want to light up that part of the memory that you're going to target. So you think about, about a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, my heart was racing. I could see it now. You know, the look of the expression on the person's face. I could even describe the office, and I was thinking, boy, am I in trouble? And okay. Then what you do is you spend a little bit of time there, really kind of channeling that experience, and then you shake it off. Now, usually that involves distracting yourself a little bit. So you could be talking about the weather. You could talk about, you know, what did you do on the weekend. I like to use what are some positive things that have happened over the last week, or what are some things you're grateful for in your life. What are some things about you that you're glad that you possess, you know, like loyalty or hard work or ethics or, you know, perseverance, right? We spend a little bit of time talking about that. The reason is, if you're in an unresourceful state, and we're going to pivot to a resourceful state, it's hard to get there directly from an unresourceful state. So you want to kind of shake that off, get to a little better mindset, but you do need to start in an unresourceful state to trigger that memory center so you know where to bring the resourceful state a little bit later on. Now, here's what happens. So in most therapy sessions, doesn't that happen automatically? Like, a person will go into therapy or coaching. They're already there. You don't have to bring them to that unresourceful state. You're already there. But very often a therapist or coach will talk about it, and they'll say, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. What's the issue? What are you upset about? And then the person starts to think about it. Now, in order to really make it come alive, sometimes people will feel like we want to go into detail. You know, we want to go, especially if you're a cognitive behavioral therapist, I want to know what thoughts and actions and even physiology they're associating with it. Do you necessarily have to go into that detail? No, you can just kind of say, just tell me what was going on. Yeah, I was really upset. I was talking to my boss. And all those things might become flooding in. And in fact, some therapy believe you don't even need to ask them the question. They're already there, right? So it's lit up. So some people think, you know, a person's already there. You can immediately pivot to something more positive. Maybe you can spend 2 or 3 minutes there. Others, especially if you're looking for behaviors and thoughts, you might need to spend 5 or 10 or even 15 minutes having them really kind of think, like, what was I thinking, what was I doing, what was I feeling? Then you shake it off, again, using some other technique, talk about another subject. And then you have them associate into a resourceful state. And by that I mean confidence, positivity, self-assurance, acceptance, patience, optimism, you name it. It's whatever resourceful state a person thinks that would be appropriate and they would need for that situation. Right, so far we have associating into an unresourceful state, the problem state, the issue, right? Then disassociating from that by kind of shaking it off, and then associating into a resourceful state. Now, let's say a person picks a common one, confidence. I just want to be confident, right? And you can start off by saying, you know, what difference would that make? You know, what impact would that have had? And a person can talk about the impact or the difference that that state would have on them. And very often that's done just to make sure that that's the state they want. So, for example, if a person started off saying, I would feel more patient. And what difference do you make? Well, I'd feel more confident, or I'd feel happier. That may be the state, the happiness of the confidence, not the patience. So sometimes you want to find out, like, what impact, what difference would that state really make to them, to find out the real state. It's also motivation. If I was in that state and I feel more cool, calm, and collected, that's motivating. Then the second thing you can do in this associating into the positive state is, what are the elements of that state? Like, when you think of a person who's confident, just kind of in the abstract, right, from movies or TV shows or just your own memory, you know, well, a confident person, they're sitting up straight, right? They're moving with purpose. They've got a strong tone in their voice, right? Their thoughts are can-do, you know. Their body is relaxed and calm. We associate certain traits and elements with different resourceful states. And then you can ask a person, when was the last time they felt that way? Just organically, just naturally. Doesn't matter if it was a month ago or 10 years ago. You just ask them, when was the last time and really to close their eyes and think back and just how were they sitting, how were they standing, how were they talking, how were they moving, what were they feeling in their body, what were their thoughts, what would an outside person who doesn't have access to their internal state, what would they see that would let another person know this person's confident, right? And again, what they're doing is that memory center in their brain, we're lighting that up, right? So we already lit up the negative state by talking about, like, what's the problem, what's going on. Now we're lighting up the resourceful state, because that's the state we want, right? So we have the associating into the unresourceful state, the shaking it off, the disassociating, the associating into a positive state, and then we bring them together. Now in NLP they call that the collapse, the bringing together. So that's when you say, you know, if you were to feel that resourceful way in that problem that you had mentioned that we started off with, how would you have responded or reacted differently? And the brain now is connecting those two parts of the brain, right? So just like you gave the presentation in school and you were laughed at and you connected that, you have this unresourceful state, and now you're bringing a resourceful state and you're connecting them. Now you do this again and again and again and again, and it's going to make better connections and more positive connections, so you don't feel the same way about that event. Now some people might make it more broad. They say, do you need to attach it to a specific event? Some people, they say you can just talk about general happiness and not connect it to a specific event. You're kind of just making a more positive experience. But I think it's helpful to connect a specific event to a specific event. And then there is the kind of transferability that will happen over time. Now there's one final piece here though. In the real world, we don't have an event, go to a positive event, and then after the fact, bring it back. Life is linear. So I would then ask a person to imagine in the future a similar negative event happening next week. And if that negative event was occurring, and they were already in that positive event when it happened, to picture themselves like a movie, how they would respond to doing that. It's kind of like when an athlete goes through their routine in their mind, like they know what they're going to do, and they kind of play that movie in their mind about how they would do that performance, that event, like the Olympics or something. You want people to be able to prep for the future, right? Because that's the way life works, right? We don't get a do-over. We don't get to go back and do it. We got to move it forward. If you think about it, though, in cognitive behavioral therapy, right, have a negative event, and we highlight that event, right? Then very often, just through the course of conversation, sometimes people pivot from the conversation. Maybe we talk about other things are brought in that are maybe not as directly involved. That's kind of like the shaking off. And then what's the positive thoughts and behaviors you'd rather have instead? And if you were to think that way, might it not change? EMDR, right? EMDR, the eye movement, right? Could be you coming in with a negative image and negative thoughts, right? And then you kind of blank it out. And then what are the positive thoughts that you'd rather have associated with that, right? NLP, certainly a lot of NLP techniques, the different fast phobia technique or the swish technique, a lot of these have the elements. Even like solution focused, you assume that a person's already coming in that state, so you don't need to highlight the negative state. And then you just talk about resourceful states and what that resourceful state would be. Some people bring it back to the negative state. Some people just let the positive resourceful state, and that the brain will know unconsciously to bring it to that situation. You don't have to direct it. Hypnotherapy, you talk about a negative state, and then you bring it in, and you say, well, now you're feeling more confident, and you're feeling relaxed, right? So a lot of these elements are there. Now, in some of them, they're a little bit more fluid. Like for psychoanalysis, you talk about the negative. Then you go around the unconscious, you talk about dreams. That could be viewed as the disassociating or the shaking it off. Then you make some connections. You're probably going back and forth if it's not so structured, you go from one to the other. It's kind of moving back and forth the whole time. But most of these elements, if not all of them, is present in any kind of theory of change. You associate into a negative situation, right? That's why you're there. at some point you got to pivot away from that. You got to talk about something else. It may seem like you're talking about the same thing, but your brain is kind of pivoting to something else. And I think the brain does that because it needs a little bit of a break, to be honest with you. Then you kind of come back and you make a connection. Like, maybe the therapist, the analyst will make some interpretation. You'll think of something, the aha moment, right? Maybe in cognitive therapy, more positive self-talk, and applying it to that situation, right? If you go back in the past, you tell yourself you were less resourceful, you were a kid, you were young, you didn't have all the resources you have now. But all or most of those elements are in play to some degree or another in any theory of change. There may be a few exceptions. That's fine. Nothing's perfect, but it does seem like these elements are in play. In NLP, it's called the meta pattern, not the meta model. Some of the names are similar in NLP. This is called the meta pattern, and again, John Overdurf. You can look it up. You also look up, there's neurons that fire together, wire together. There's a couple cool videos that talk about that. So if you're interested in learning more, I would encourage you to do a little research, Google it or YouTube it. But again, for yourself, you can look and see how this might work and whether or not you see this actually played out. So I hope this was helpful. I think that, again, no matter what theory of change, coaching, counseling, philosophy, and any kind of change element, right? You start off with the not so positive, right? And you kind of like think about that. Then you kind of give yourself a break. And then where do you want to be? What do you want to do instead, right? And then you bring those two together, right? So those are the 4 states. And then I add the bringing it into the future, because that's how life works. Anyway, I'd be curious about your thoughts, and I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time. All right, bye-bye.